guys, and welcome back to the Puro Wrestling Academy. I am Ray Russell, and bringing you once again the man with the plan, the professor of Puroresu himself, going to show us the way here. In 1962, in the world of Japanese professional wrestling history, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the program, Mr. Dan Ginnetty.
Thanks for having me back. This is an important year for Japanese professional wrestling, 1962. There are some major things that go on and almost legendary stories that you think there's no way that could possibly have happened. Well, we did the research, and if anything, it's worse than you might have originally heard.
Yeah.
Wait till you hear about Freddie Blassie's time in Japan. It's not going to be like the other stories we've told you.
No, this isn't an unmasking or anything of that nature. This is some pretty heavy stuff, and Blassie's talked about it, and sometimes I call into question the number of victims, perhaps, and I don't want to spoil too much early on that he's talked about in the past. And he may have embellished to a degree, but just knowing what's coming here in the stories you're about to tell us, Dan, is just insane to think about. So I'm looking forward to that. As we got some really cool keynotes this year of 1962. Multiple major title changes to discuss, including the tag team title here in Japan, as well as the WWA World title going to change hands on more than one occasion. And it involves the stars right here in Japan. In fact, one of those title changes is going to cause the most dangerous riot in Puroresu history, at least up until 1962. We'll have details on that as well later on in the program.
Yeah, and I have to speculate. I won't go too deep into it, but this could be the benefit of JWA being very healthy from a financial standpoint since 1959. This World League has worked out. I'd go as far to say it probably worked out better than Rikidozan had hoped. And he is more flush with cash than he's ever been. And that gives him the negotiating ability to say, hey, listen, you're going to come in with your title. We're going to do a deal. And I'm willing to pay you for it. So all of a sudden, there's a lot more exciting things happening in the JWA on the Japanese island itself, because I think the money is there to make it happen.
Yeah, and while we're on the topic of title changes, we'll get into that epic matches, I should say, involving Rikidozan versus Fred Blassie, a feud and matches that were said to have left many a fan dead from heart attacks. I know you got a lot all about that here later in the program, but because of all the blood from the vampire, long before he was the Hollywood fashion plate people, he was the vampire Freddie Blassie. He loved to rip open people's foreheads with those sharpened teeth. He would take the nail file and sharpen his teeth. Wasn't just a gimmick. He really had some nice looking teeth there for a while, known as the vampire, specifically over here in Japan. And it forced some of the TV stations involved here to take some of the matches involving Blassie at the very least and go from color TV back to black and white.
Yeah, now color TV was a relatively new technological improvement, but there weren't that many color TVs out that were in Japan at the time. But it didn't matter because the few that did, let's just say Freddie Blassie had a profound effect on some of the people who watched his matches. And we've beaten around the bush so much on that story, but you're going to get all of it in this episode.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. For those interested, you can go over to my Patreon right now, just the $5 all access tier portion, patreon.com/WrestleCopia. I posted all three of the series of matches between Blassie and Rikidozan March, April, and July of 1962 in their entirety, guys. There's different versions of those matches out there. The three that I posted, all three matches in complete form, run nearly 2 hours with the intros, the outros, some interviews in between, but altogether about 2 hours of good stuff there for those wanting to check those out after you listen to this episode.
Yep, 1962 is a busy year for a number of reasons. It's not just all going to be house show results. It's not going to be house show attendances or title changes. There are significant stories, and Rikidozan is still the head of all of it. So Rikidozan makes enough news on his own outside of the wrestling ring as much as he does inside the wrestling ring. Another action-packed and story-packed episode coming your way.
Yeah, so we're going to see the likes, and we're going to talk a little bit about Giant Bob and what he's been doing over in the States. He's over there on a 20-month-long excursion. He started in July of 61, going to come back not until March of 63. So he's over in North America for all of 1962. Going to take a look at some of the stuff Bob is doing. We're also going to talk more about Antonio Inoki, Kintaro Oki, and the 4th Annual World League is upon us in 1962. Dan, Rikidozan outdoing himself, bringing in the likes of Thesz, Dick Hutton, Larry the Axe Hennig, Killer Buddy Austin, Arnold Skulland, and Mike Sharpe Sr., that is, not to be confused with Iron Mike Sharpe. We talked about the Sharpe brothers many a times in the early episodes. Mike Sharpe going to make his long-awaited return, as well as Mr. Atomic is back for the 4th Annual World League.
Mr. Atomic, great Togo's in here as well. They're really loading up these World Leagues. I try to put myself in the mind of a fan back in 1962, seeing all of these the most famous stars in the world coming to where I live at a card in my area. How could you not buy a ticket for these things?
Notwithstanding the local talent that's going to be part of these World League cards, but you got 2 world champions, NWA world champions in there, Hutton and Thesz. Plus, we've seen Mike Sharpe here before. He's considered a legend, one of the original Gaijin of Japan. So there's quite a few big names here for certain. And Mr. Atomic, we've seen here in the past, and looking forward to that as always. So if you're ready, Dan, I'll allow you to begin class.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, please take your seats. Class is in session.
All righty.
Okay. I guess the best place to start is at the beginning.
That's what I've always heard.
They continue their trend of very creative tour names. And the first tour of the year is the International Competitions of the Winter. Starting in January 5th, going to the middle of February, only 15 shows. And what you're going to find out is just about every card is taped for television. I made reference to the fact that last year, I believe, Nippon TV was so happy with the performance of their bi-weekly wrestling show. They would only get it once every 2 weeks. The other week, the Wide World of Disney or the Walt Disney show would take its time slot. Wrestling was so popular that Nippon TV went to Rikidozan and said, hey, we'd like to have you every week. That off week that Disney airs, we'll air you. It'll just be in a later time slot. So the amount of revenue Rikidozan and the JWA was getting from Nippon TV doubled. They now have 52 shows a year.
That's what Rikidozan needed, Dan, is more money.
Yeah, and more bowling alleys and everything else he's doing it with. I will say that he must be paying the wrestlers now because he's got a lot of them on his roster and they're all still here.
Yeah.
A tour that goes 6 weeks but only has 15 cards is indicative of the fact that he's basically just doing them for the TV tapings because it's a guaranteed moneymaker. He's getting paid every time he produces that show because Nippon TV is going to air it. We can just roll through these results. I don't know if there are any title changes in the first tour of the year. I know that they do have some title matches with the NWA International Heavyweight, All Asia Heavyweight Champion. So Rikidozan is defending both belts, but it's against the likes of Rocky Hamilton, tag matches with Torium Bori because they are the All Asia Tag Team Champions as well, and generally facing teams like Ricky Waldo, Luther Lindsay, Rocky Hamilton, Ronnie Etchinson. Well, you know Ronnie Etchinson. They've even got these 6-man tags in January. There's nothing of note that I'm seeing through this first tour, these first 15 shows, other than they're all on TV and they're defending their tag belts. Rikidozan is defending his title belts, but I will say almost towards the end of the tour on February 3rd in Tokyo, Japan, Nihon University Lecture Hall, we do have a title change. The JWA All Asia Tag Team Championship match, best 2 out of 3 falls. Ricky Waldo and Luther Lindsay did defeat Rikidozan and Torium Bori 2 falls to 1 to become the new champions. Waldo pinned Torium Bori in 10 minutes. Torium Bori submitted Waldo 5 minutes after that. And then somebody pinned Torium Bori. We're not sure who. So Rikidozan loses his tag title belt without taking a single fall.
Yeah, Torium taking both falls there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, would you expect anything different? You're in the main event of these shows that are drawing money.
He's giving up the belt, though. I mean, that had to be hard enough, just giving up the belt. You know, I want to say before you continue on, giving us all the information, I made a little joke on the last episode when we were covering 61 that the publicity for some of the late-in tours of the year there, they started billing Lindsay and Waldo as cousins. And I said, why would they do that? Because they never acknowledge one another. They're never in a team at any point in 61. However, right out of the gate here in 62, I guess they did know what they were doing. Who am I to doubt Rikidozan and his fantastic booking here? Waldo and Lindsay are here as a tag team, and now they capture the tag team titles from Rikidozan and Taira Nobori says a little bit about what they're wanting to put behind these guys.
Yeah, it's the slow build. It's like the Vince McMahon build, where by SummerSlam he knows what the WrestleMania main event's going to be. They were already portraying Lindsay and Waldo as being related somehow before they even really put them together. That wouldn't happen until months later. But I will say, we just talked about the title change. They did win the title. They were presented with the championship trophy, but the fans were not used to seeing Rikidozan lose a match, especially to illegal tactics used by his opponents. Of course, they used illegal tactics. The fans were furious at this decision, and they began to throw chairs at the new championship.
Oh, my God.
So Luther Lindsay, fights back against him, and a fan in the rear of the building set fire to his newspaper. And despite the chairs being made of wood, the fire didn't spread, luckily. Rikidozan and more than 50 policemen made a desperate effort to quell the worst riot in the history of Japanese professional wrestling. Sadly, the title match was not televised, likely due to the fact that Rikidozan would not allow a match in which he lost a title to be filmed.
Which is so unfortunate that it wasn't preserved, because a lot of matches have popped up. I would have loved to have seen some of the chaos here. Fans throwing chairs in the ring, the building getting set on fire. These are things that Paul E. Dangerously almost got shut down for, right? And we're doing it back here in 1962 Japan.
Now, I think for a fan, that would be exciting to watch on television.
Yes,
but
not in the
for
arena.
anyone that was getting a phone call from Rikidozan looking to book their building, they probably wouldn't be nearly as excited to see a fire in a show somewhere else. They might politely decline to host a JWA wrestling show. So perhaps it's for the best that it was left to probably a few scant newspaper articles, and certainly not televised.
And it makes me wonder, because Rikidozan has all that power. We see what is posted and not published in the newspapers here, the spins that they put on things. I wonder if this is one of those instances where it was left out for the most part of some of the papers.
I wouldn't be surprised, because that just hurts business. You can't have 50 police getting involved, riots, and trying to burn the building down. That's not going to help Rikidozan at all. I will say that if he knew he was going to lose the belt, but he also knew it wasn't going to be televised, he couldn't have taken one of the falls.
Yeah,
really?
Good call. Yeah. They say that the fans aren't used to seeing him lose when he didn't even do it. Imagine what they would have done if he actually took the pinfall. My God. He just sat there and watched Taira Nobori get pinned twice. And they still rioted.
Yeah, far be it from me to try to put myself in the place of a fan at the match, but I guess I could see possibly Luther Lindsay or Waldo like going at Rikidozan with a foreign object to keep him occupied so he couldn't break up a pin attempt for Toyonbori. Possibly that's what got them so angry, because Rikidozan didn't get to play part of the hero. I'm speculating on a speculation, because we don't have any details on how that match actually ended. But I could see a vision of that where Rikidozan's down and being attacked by one of the other guys with a foreign object, or a native object. Is it a native object when it's in Japan?
If it was made in Japan, yeah, sure. If it was made in Taiwan, that's a different story.
Fair. Well, we don't want to talk about Taiwan. Let's see. We'll move on to the 9th of February. And they go to a draw. So they're defending this belt that they just got.
Fighting champions.
Well, that's good. They do get some defenses in here. They survived the first tour of the year. Yeah. And the bad guys have the tag titles. So that's new. That's exciting. That's something to talk about.
Yeah.
And it would spark interest. In fact, I'd want them to be in the next tour, which they are. The international competitions of the spring pick up pretty much a couple days after the last match of the last tour, and this one would go for 2 months, 8 cards. So they're not even getting all TV. I mean, everything's going to better be on TV, because there's no reason not to. They're only holding 8 cards here.
I see here on the tour, it is a lot of the same names, because again, the tour never actually ended. And like you said, 8 cards over the next 2 months, do the math. It's basically just the TV tapings. However, right out of the gate, we've got another title change.
Yep. So we'll go right to the February 15th show, the main event for the All-Asian Tag title. Rikidozan and Toyonbori do defeat Ricky Waldo and Luther Lindsay 2 straight falls to become the new champion. And Rikidozan submits Lindsay with a Boston Crab in 29 minutes and 38 seconds. And it appears that Lindsay probably could not continue after the bell rang, and they win the second fall in 0 seconds by forfeit. And that lets Rikidozan and Torianbori regain their All-Asian Tag Team Championship.
See, it didn't last too long, but longer than I suspected anyway.
Yeah, and because these two tours are kind of mashed together, maybe I'm giving the JWA more credit than I should to leave end a tour with almost like not a happy ending. You know what I mean?
Right.
Rikidozan's going to leave for the United States after the February 16th card, and he's going to wrestle in Los Angeles. And he's really going there for a talent scouting mission, because that's what he does almost every year. He'll either leave for America for just to make money to come back and fund a tour, or he'll leave to negotiate wrestlers and make agreements so they'll come for a future tour back in Japan. This time, he's really going to secure more talent for the 4th World League tournament. And he wanted to bring in every world champion from all the major promotions. Pat O'Connor at the time, NWA heavyweight champion. Vern Gagne, AWA champion. Freddie Blassie, WWA champion. Eduardo Carpentier. And names like Buddy Rogers and Bruno Sammartino. Which, to get Bruno Sammartino in 1962, it tells you the kind of star that Bruno was at that time. Mm-hmm. Even though he didn't have the WWF belt yet, he was on everybody's radar, and that's in spite of them really blackballing him early in his career for several years.
Right.
But that's another story, and you can hear it right from Bruno Sammartino. He's done several shoot interviews that describe his early days. Wrestling politics being what they are at the time, it was a plan doomed to fail from the start. Let's see. How far back do you want to go in history? You want to go 40 years back? Let's do it. When it became obvious that Vince Jr. was going to try to take over all of wrestling in the United States, the major promotions at the time, Crockett, Vern Gagne's AWA, and even Memphis, banded together to make a promotion called Pro Wrestling USA. Mm-hmm. And it was like the best of all the promotions all jammed together so they could have these cards with all these great wrestlers, which sounds like a great idea on paper until you'd put two great wrestlers from two different promotions in the ring against each other, and someone says, who's going to win? And then everyone goes, oh, no. I can't have my guy lose because he's my big guy. And The other guy says, I can't have my guy lose either. So now what do? Not have a good match is probably the start of it. Yeah. So Pro Wrestling USA existed for a couple years, right? But it never achieved what they thought it could achieve, which was a legit competition for Vince, because you had stars from other promotions coming together, but you didn't want to give up your heat or your title or your position to a wrestler from another promotion you had no control over. So talk about being doomed from the start. It's very similar to this situation where Rikidozan's trying to get all the champions from everywhere to come wrestle in his World League tournament, not realizing at some point they all have to wrestle each other. And that's not something that Rikidozan's going to want to deal with. And it turns out he doesn't.
No, he doesn't. He doesn't really have the luxury of bringing over every major star across the United States. Unfortunately, that would have been a hell of a coup. I don't even know if they've created a word for what that would have been had he been able to bring all those names in for one single the tournament here, this round robin style tournament upcoming in the 4th World League. Man, that would have been something else. But he does get quite a few credible names. We talked about some of them already, and we'll be hitting on more when we get there. But right now, you talked about Rikidozan going over in February to the United States, doing a little scouting. But I believe he also went over there and had some conversations with Jules Strongbow, not to be confused with Frank Hill, who became Jules Strongbow, the quote-unquote younger brother of Chief J in the WWF in the early 80s. This was the original Jules Strongbow. He was one of the main promoters out in Los Angeles, along with Eileen Eaton and the LaBelles. And Strongbow at one point kind of moved away from the NWA because he realized that they were never going to give him the world title out there where he wanted it. And so he kind of creates his own belt, the WWA World Heavyweight title. And Rikidozan, realizing he's not going to get the NWA title, now he's going to go have conversations with Jules.
Yeah, to some degree, Jules Strongbow beats Vern Gagne to the punch a bit, and certainly beats Vince McMahon to the punch by saying, why should we negotiate for a few dates every year with the NWA champion when we can just anoint our own champion and then we have him all the time?
Right.
And Jules Strongbow thought enough of that where he resigned his membership to the NWA, created his own world title, the WWA World Heavyweight Champion, because he just knew the NWA would never let him have the NWA title. So knowing that, Rikidozan made a deal with Strongbow and reportedly paid him $25,000 for the opportunity to defeat current champion Fred Blassie, wear the belt for a certain amount of time. And we don't know if the payment got made, but a reporter close to Rikidozan verified the story. This story is not out of the ordinary. I believe that when we start talking about All Japan with Baba, similar stories are going to come out. So this, at least on its face, seems plausible.
Yes.
But there is a twist to it, because Rikidozan was said to have made a deal with the great Togo, who worked in the LA office at the time. But when Togo presented the deal to the matchmaker, Jules Strongbow, got his approval, he told him Rikidozan had offered to pay him $10,000.
Wow.
And the remaining $15,000 went into Togo's own pocket.
Yikes.
Which, that is 1,000,000% believable for what we've heard
I would absolutely believe. That is pro wrestling all day long.
That is absolutely hilarious, and I totally believe it. And I'd read a book about Togo, because he's got his hands in all kinds of things, and we'll talk about Togo.
He's the guy. He's the dealer. Yes, absolutely.
If we want to give Antonio Inoki any credit for really becoming a super duper star, it's because he was featured prominently in the late 60s on NET, Nippon Educational Television, later to become called TV Asahi. And there are those that think the only reason that network started airing wrestling, and with Inoki on top, is because Lou Thesz and the Great Togo were making moves to start a brand new promotion, and they were negotiating with TV Asahi for them to broadcast the wrestling show. And as in an effort to block competition, JWA said, well, can't we work out a deal? We'll let you air all the JWA stuff, except you don't get to air Baba. You get to air the Inoki matches. Nippon TV will air the Baba matches.
Okay.
And so Great Togo's like everywhere. He's not a forgotten man, but he is like the Forrest Gump of Japanese professional wrestling history.
Wherever history is, that's where Togo is, for sure. And just a quick synopsis of what you were reading there, what you were going over in your notes. So basically, Rikidozan offers Jules Strongbow, the promoter of the WWA out in Los Angeles, I'll give you $25,000 if you let me hold the title for X amount of months. And apparently the agreement was made, but that's not how it was pitched to Strongbow in the end. I guess Togo was the one relaying this story. And so when he got to Strongbow, he goes, well, Ricky offered you $10,000, and the approval was made. And then the other 15 never saw Strongbow. It saw the pocket of Togo. So now that part I do believe.
Me too. And I love it. That is so pro wrestling.
It certainly is.
So at least from a chronological standpoint, Rikidozan defeated Freddie Blassie in Los Angeles on March 28th, 1962 to win the WWA title.
So we have a new WWA world champion, Rikidozan, the world champion, going to bring it back to his home country of Japan.
Now, during this time, they're still running this tour. Granted, it's 2 months long and they only run 8 shows, but we're running 2 days after that in the Riki Sports Palace, so we're not spending any money either. I wouldn't be surprised if all of these are in the Riki Sports Palace.
I got April 13th here. It's the Welcome Home show for Mike Sharpe. He's in the main event, coming back to Japan. 6-man tag team action there, it looks like.
Correct. Yep, I've got him there. And so he does eventually make it back a couple weeks later. And the last show of the tour is not in the Riki Sports Palace. It's going to be in the Tsukimigoka High School Gymnasium. 3,000 people in a high school gymnasium. Isn't that not? Maybe my high school is small.
I'm
that
guessing
seems like a big.
That's a pretty large gymnasium, yes, but also at the same time, I don't know that they necessarily had the fire marshals there to check anything. So who knows?
Fair enough. And in the main event of that match, it's a 2 out of 3 falls. It's a 6-man match. Rikidozan, Toyombori, and Kokichi Endo, the number 1 guy. Don't tell Toyombori, but Rikidozan trusts Endo a lot more than he trusts Toyombori. They were able to beat the team of Mr. Atomic, Mike Sharpe, and Ricky Waldo. Well, 1 fall to nothing, but they went to a time limit draw.
Yeah, they score, it looks like the first fall about halfway through, 29 minutes in, a disqualification victory for the baby faces, if you will. And then, yeah, they take it all the way to the full hour after that. So they get the win based on 1 fall and an entire hour of 6-man action.
Yep, in 2 months, 8 total shows, and Rikidozan had time to run over to America, probably do a little bit of wrestling, but secured a deal and got that WWA title. So now he is returning with a belt around his waist, just in time for the 4th annual World League.
Yes.
33 cards, so they started with like 14 in the first one, went to 29 for the second, 34, I think, for the third, and now this is the fourth. They're in the 30s, and they're going to run 33 cards in just over a month, the end of April to the end of May. And get this list of guest foreigners: Thesz, Fred Blassie, Dick Hutton, Larry Hennig. We talked about this at the beginning of the show. Duke Hoffman.
Hoffman was a AWA World Tag Team Champion with Larry Hennig prior to this run, or maybe during this run. So that would explain both guys being on this tour.
So would he drop out and Race take his spot, or was there a gap between them? I wonder. Because I know that Larry Hennig would meet up with Harley Race, and they would be quite a tag team for a long time. Sure. Arnold Skolin, the old manager for Bob Backlund in the good old days, as a wrestler this time. Mike Sharpe, the great Togo, with very bulky pockets full of $15,000 of stolen money.
Yeah.
And of course, Clyde Steves, you know him, you love him, you can't live without him, Mr. Atomic.
Mr. Atomic. Doesn't matter how many times he's unmasked, he always comes back with the mask on.
It's almost a great gimmick because it's
an awesome gimmick.
It's a deconstruction of everyone else's mask gimmick. So it's something new, even though it happens every time.
And the locals involved in the World League this year can include Kokichi Endo, Tayanobori, Yoshimura, Inoki, and Oki. And Rikidozan, listen to this, having won the first 3, I wonder how, having won the first 3 World Leagues, he's seeded all the way to the finals of this World League. So he doesn't have to compete in any matches. I mean, other than the main event, the tag team matches, but in the tournament, Rikidozan has to do squat. He just has to sit there and wait for the winner of the rest of the tournament to get done, and then he'll fight them on the final day of the tour.
That's true, but it's not that he doesn't participate. He just doesn't participate in the tournament.
Right.
He's wrestling on every show. In fact, the first one, he's defending his All-Asia Heavyweight Championship, his NWA International Heavyweight Championship, and his newly acquired WWA World Heavyweight Championship.
Yeah, Blassie's coming back after it.
Yep, so Rikidozan's all over these cards. He's just not in the tournament proper. But even with all these luminaries, Thesz has been here before at least once, possibly twice by this point. The advanced publicity for Freddie Blassie's arrival was featured in all the newspapers. The LA office sent over videotapes showing Blassie biting his opponents and filing his teeth. Let's see. Okay, Hollywood stars have to have pretty teeth. And in the olden times, they would just get caps where they would shave down their teeth to little nubs, and they would put fancy caps over them to make the teeth look perfect. But they weren't made out of enamel. They were just made out of whatever material the caps were made out of. Fred Blassie's gimmick was he would use a file, and he would file the edges of these capped teeth down so they would be pointy.
Right.
And he would bite his opponent and make them bleed, and he really looked like an absolute maniac. So when the LA office sent over these tapes to Japan showing Blassie biting his opponents and filing his teeth, they ain't never seen nothing like that before. They did send over interviews that were taped in the studios. Blassie promising to get the title back from Rikidozan, so he's already prepping the Japanese fans that Blassie's coming and he's angry and he's coming to get that title back. Just really putting over the entire concept of this World League tournament, where it's almost as if Fred Blassie is looking at the tournament as an afterthought. Like he's going to blow through everybody just so he can get his hands on Rikidozan. And by the time Fred Blassie arrives, he was over more than any other heel in the history of wrestling in Japan. Buildings were sold out weeks before the World League tour began.
That had to feel so good if you're Rikidozan. You don't even have to worry about selling the tickets. Boom, already done.
1962, he's got this nailed. He's got it figured out, and everything is going Rikidozan's way. Blassie walks off the plane when he arrives at the Haneda airport, and he's already filing his teeth, and the photographers are going crazy. A reporter yells out, "Kyuketsuki!" And Blassie yelled back, "What the hell does that mean?" And a translator replied, "He's calling you a vampire." So he gets the vampire gimmick as soon as he steps off the plane in the Haneda airport, because he's already filing his teeth. He's already knows what his gimmick is. He promoted it. He sent the tapes over, and he's given the fans what they want. Well, what they think they want. Wait till they actually see it in action.
Yeah, that's gonna be pretty early in the World League too. April 23rd. The matchup gonna go down, the rematch for the WWE World Heavyweight title. Rikidozan, now the champion, Freddie Blassie, the challenger here in Japan.
Yeah, we'll shoot right to it. Technically, the first show of the World League tournament has no tournament matches. It's called the Eve, like the evening of, like Christmas Eve, the show before the tournament starts. And that just had a bunch of exhibition matches. Freddie Blassie did face Mr. Atomic in that. So we'll get to the 23rd. With the WWA World Heavyweight Championship match, best 2 out of 3 falls, 61-minute time limit. Referees Arnold Skoland, I'm surprised they agreed to that, but Rikidozan defeats Fred Blassie 2 falls to 1 to retain the title, and it's the first defense he has of the world title.
So I don't really recall the first 2 falls because I watched these matches one time over fairly recently. I remember the final fall was huge because, as we're going to see coming forward when the title changes back, spoiler alert guys, but even when Rikidozan won the title, we're not necessarily going to see a straight up 1, 2, 3 in the middle of the ring, but that's what we get here in Japan. Rikidozan giving the rematch to Freddie Blassie, and that third fall, Blassie sending Dozan to the floor. He gets back up on the apron, lands a shoulder butt into the gut of Blassie. Blassie taking a fun bump back, and then basically Rikidozan diving into the ring on top of him, hooking the leg and securing a 1, 2, 3 pinfall. So he actually defeats Blassie by pinfall here in his homeland.
And that third fall goes 32 minutes, 24 seconds. Mm-hmm. The first 2 falls together were just over 18. So this is in the 51st minute of the match. And Rikidozan's going over the rope to pin Blassie. So that is a long third fall for a 3-fall match. But that's his first defense on April 23rd. And he makes it through this one. But I don't think Blassie's done.
It may be important to cover the main event of the April 27th show.
Yes.
I know you got some news to read here after the matchup.
Yeah. The main event on April 27th, that's in Kobe City. The attendance was either 8,000 or 10,000, packed to capacity regardless, is what I'm being told. There was a tag match. Thesz and Fred Blassie and Mike Sharpe defeated Rikidozan, Toriumbori, and the Great Togo 2 falls to 0. And this is the match that we kind of mentioned already. I'm going to skip the actual result and just go to the reported news after the event. On April 27th, terrible incidents occurred in various parts of the country which became objects of public concern. I would say so. During this 6-man tag match in Kobe, which aired live on television, Fred Blassie bit his opponent's forehead, and the Nippon TV cameras zoomed in for a close-up. Thanks, guys. It was reported that the sight of blood pouring from the Great Togo's forehead caused 6 elderly men to die of heart failure. That news was reported in every newspaper the following day, and it became an important social issue. One media report said 11 people had passed away, and more than 50 were taken to the hospital. The report of 6 was closer to the truth.
Well, that's 6 more people than I ever killed by watching me do anything in my lifetime. So
that is true. We told you he had a profound effect on the people that watched his matches. You can't get more profound than that, as far as I know. In Fred Blassie's autobiography, Kosuke Takuchi, the president of Weekly Gong magazine, wrote, "The TV broadcasts were only black and white then, so Blassie's hair looked white. His eyes were popping out and he had blood all over himself. He was really frightening. In the past, the foreign heel would come in and lose. Then he would accept his loss like a Japanese athlete would. Blassie was the only wrestler who, when he lost, he still wanted to bite somebody. In Japan, which is an orderly society, we didn't understand this maniacal kind of man. Only 50% of the population had TVs, so big groups of people sat together to watch wrestling. There still wasn't an understanding of the distance between yourself and the TV. It was like Freddie Blassie was coming into your house."
Wow.
And regarding the people who died, Blassie said, "If you're too old and too ill, don't watch me on TV. If you do, you get what you deserve." Holy smokes.
Carney through and through, Freddie Blassie.
That
right
is
there.
a heel.
Yeah.
If you didn't know already, Fred Blassie is the heel.
Well, he gets how to make money, right, Dan? You talk, like they said, the heels would lose typically, and they would shake hands or raise the hand of the victor eventually, or at least bow to them as they leave the ring. They basically leave with mutual respect. And Freddie Blassie's like, I'm not having any of that. Whether win, lose, or draw, he still wants more of the opponent after the matchup, attacking them, biting them, making them bleed. And I could see, that being a big deal. You've never seen any. What am I watching right now? It is like a vampire movie of sorts.
Yeah, there's nothing that approximates a legitimate fighting contest like many of the other wrestlers performed in the olden times in Japanese professional wrestling. Again, shaking hands, bowing, that kind of thing. Fred Blassie is the heel's heel. Yes. And he's giving these people something they've never seen before. And we've got another article here titled Grunt and Groan, Just Too Rough. This is out of Tokyo. 4 deaths from heart failure are mute testimony that the Japanese are not ready yet for American zany comedy.
Wow. Comedy.
So they're referring to wrestling as zany comedy.
Zany comedy that gives people heart attacks. That's a hell of a type of comedy. I'm not familiar with that kind of comedy, Dan.
Extra zany, I guess. These many people have died, and 1 child has fainted, according to known records, while watching American-style professional wrestling matches. They thought the fighting was for real. Conservative Japanese newspapers and much of the public blame sports magazines and promoters for the present trend in Japanese wrestling. Rikidozan, an ex-sumo wrestler turned capitalist, evil capitalist, introduced Western-style wrestling into Japan a few years ago. Since then, he's built a huge sports palace where he stages matches using beefy imports from the United States as fall guys for the Japanese grapplers.
Interesting.
Well, he's got all the key words and tricky phrases here.
Mm-hmm.
It pleases the intensely nationalistic Japanese fan when the smaller Japanese uses judo, karate, and help from the referee to subdue the big bad American who has been booting him all over the arena. As the sport caught on, more and more roughness was feigned to keep the crowds pushing through the styles. The Japanese good guy, of course, always wins, but to stir the crowd to feverish pitch, he had to first be beaten, bloodied, hit with chairs, kicked and gouged. All the false paraphernalia to which the Western fan has become accustomed was thrown into the act. Japanese, seeing their idols mistreated, reacted differently, some violently, some suffered heart attacks.
Well, it seems like even back in the 60s, I wouldn't say the business was exposed, but whoever wrote this particular article, they kind of had an idea of what wrestling was, not just in Japan, but also in the States, because they basically tell you the format of the style of wrestling, right?
They sure do. And it doesn't sound like they're that big of a fan of it either.
No, yeah.
If I'm able to read between the lines.
Yeah. Harry Muchnick's son or something like that, maybe, right?
Lots of articles were written. Rikidozan took a lot of heat from the executives at Nippon TV. The producer in charge of the TV's wrestling program was summoned to the Diet, which is essentially the Congress in Japan, as an unsworn witness to basically explain yourself. This is a little note about the color TV. NHK and NTV introduced color TV to Japan in September of 1960, but only the ultra-rich were able to buy them. It'd be several years before the average consumer was able to purchase a color set. However, for those who did have them, as a temporary solution to this issue with Fred Blassie, Nippon TV decided to broadcast wrestling not in color, but in black and white, and refrain from showing scenes considered too brutal. So maybe this is where the big X comes from, when the networks are getting angry that the action inside the ring is getting too violent for the audience, as evidenced by the results from the April 27th show.
Mm-hmm.
So that's it. That was a big day. Some say that all press is good press. I'm not sure if that's the case in this particular instance, because you don't want to have producers of TV shows having to go to Congress to testify about what happened, what they allowed to happen on their, relatively new TV channels and TV networks that have been created. So maybe a little bit much.
Yeah, well, hey, everybody involved knew what was going down, so they could have put the kibosh on it right there. But I think Blassie continues on the tour, so I don't think they were too concerned. I don't know that Blassie toned it down either. He doesn't come off to me as a guy who does just backs down, unless he absolutely had to there. But I see a lot of the papers and a lot of people in the know, the upper echelon, if you will, of the community, are very upset with this, the whole Fred Blassie vampire, or in some references, Killer Fred Blassie deal.
Yeah, Killer Fred Blassie sounds like a good gimmick, but in Japan, it isn't because they take it seriously. And they need to because they are attributing the deaths of Japanese people to Fred Blassie himself.
Yeah, at least 6 in Kobe, 4 in Tokyo. I mean, yeah, it's starting to build up a little bit there.
And there's an interesting twist to all this because he was, how he might talk down to the Japanese. But we'll get to that a little later with Fred Blassie.
This is Wrestling Nostalgia, the podcast that dives into wrestling history. Hey, wrestling fans, I'm Dave Dynasty, and if you enjoy podcasts that are knowledgeable and history-driven, then Wrestling Nostalgia is for you. With great guests and fun interviews, there are over 200 episodes in our archives. We chat with several first-time guests and often cover topics not discussed on other podcasts. Look up Wrestling Nostalgia on your favorite podcast platform and visit all of our links at linktree/WrestlePod. That is linktr.ee/RASSLEPOD. And remember, wherever you go, whatever you do, be good, be safe, and keep on growing.
Hey everybody, Gene Jackson here, inviting you to check out the Retro Wrestling Review, where each week I'm joined by some great co-hosts who help me review classic episodes of USWA Championship Wrestling, and right now we are doing week-by-week reviews of 1993. But we don't just do reviews, sometimes we get a chance to interview some of the people who were there and lived it, plus do watch-alongs. It's a lot of fun, so check out new episodes that drop every Wednesday at WrestleCopia.com, and to find links to everything associated to the podcast, you can go to USWApodcast.com.
Hey guys, Ray Russell here, curator of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, inviting you guys to listen to many of the programs here as part of the WrestleCopia brand, including, but not limited to, the Wrestling Memory Grenade, currently covering the 1988 and the WWF project. You can also listen to the Regional Wrestling Podcast, where we talk the territories, whether it's Jamie Ward with Georgia 81, Roman Gomez with the UWF in 1986, or Gene Jackson covering Memphis in 85. 3 projects going on right now over there at Regional Wrestling. You can also listen to the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. Bob goes back in time each and every week, covering not just his career, but countless stories and interactions with hundreds of wrestling names spanning his 2 decades in the business. But that's not all. You can also check out the Puro Wrestling Academy with the professor of Puroresu, Mr. Dan Ginnetty. Dan and I go back in time and cover the history of Japanese professional wrestling in the English language. And you can listen to all of those shows and more, all part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, located over at WrestleCopia.com. That's WrestleCopia.com, and anywhere your podcast streaming needs are met, from Apple to Spotify, Pocket Cast, and beyond. And while you're at it, why not subscribe to our social media guys for all the latest goings on here at the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Plus, I'm constantly adding old school video clips and pictures from throughout wrestling history. You can follow us over on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. And why not subscribe to YouTube.com/Wrestling Grenade. And of course, now would be a fantastic time to become a WrestleCopia patron over at Patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, Patreon.com/WrestleCopia, where you get so many gifts, including all of my insanely detailed show notes for every episode of The Grenade Show, Regional Wrestling, and the Monday Warfare podcast. You'll also get early access to a lot of the podcasts here on the WrestleCopia brand, where you can listen days and sometimes as much as a week earlier than the rest of the listeners. But that's still not all, guys. You also get at least a dozen digital downloads for your viewing and reading pleasure each and every month, plus random bonus video drops, and of course, the Patreon exclusive Watch Along series covering many past WWF and WCW events. And if that's not all, Videocasts, also now a part of Patreon. No subscription, cancel anytime. Give it a try for a month, guys. I think you'll like the content that I offer, and every penny of it goes right back here into paying the bills. So if you're looking to support that next up-and-coming podcast brand, please consider making it WrestleCopia. Help me pay some of the bills to keep the WrestleCopia podcast network and all of the great shows here up and running for the months and the years to come.
Let's see. We're moving towards the end of this World League. Let's see. We have some notes after the May 6th show in Kokura City Gymnasium. Every show is packed to capacity for this tour. It could not have made more money if they tried. On this date in May 6th, Jules Strongbow himself visited Japan. It was the first time. And he and Rikidozan held a press conference at a hotel in Osaka. They told the media that Rikidozan would defend his WWA title in Los Angeles in July. Jules Strongbow gave his opinion that Japanese wrestlers should be more expressive in the ring, and he found that Michiaki Yoshimura to be a great technical wrestler. And Michiaki Yoshimura is probably that's the worst kept secret in Japanese wrestling, is of all the Japanese wrestlers, the one guy that at this point in 1962 that all the outsiders looked at and says he gets it. He's a good worker, was Michiaki Yoshimura. So the fact that Joe Strongbow makes note of this in 1962 is just further confirms the feedback from other wrestlers that Yoshimura was the best of them all as far as a performer.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, Japanese wrestling fans didn't realize the WWA territory was only limited to Southern California and that the NWA covered 30 states in the country. And Rikidozan was clever enough to make fans believe the WWA world title was more valuable than the NWA world title.
Of course.
Any reporters that might have known differently kept their silence for fear Rikidozan might refuse to give them interviews.
Mm.
And there was something else that Rikidozan wasn't interested in giving information to, and was regarding Giant Baba or Shoei Baba. Baba was a huge draw in the Northeast when he was doing his overseas excursion.
Right.
And Baba corresponded with one particular journalist in Japan. He was telling him that he was frequently matched up against Buddy Rogers, the NWA world champion. And Rikidozan, who always wanted to be regarded as the number one wrestler, couldn't bear to have anybody else take that kind of position. So he asked the journalist to just not write about what Baba was doing in America because he wanted the spotlight to stay on him.
Rikidozan's the one that sends Baba over there for the proper seasoning to kind of be his next in line, really, because he's doing the big U.S. excursion like Ricky did many years before him. But Baba's getting over, and it's working. Not only is he a freak of nature, or whatever you want to call that, because he's so big, but he's actually a hell of a worker. When he was still mobile in the 70s, as we've seen on the video cast. So imagine what he was doing here 10 years prior to that. So it's kind of crazy, though. Rikidozan, hey, kayfabe the Baba stuff.
Yeah, I'm sure you're excited to hear how good Baba is doing in the States. Let's keep that amongst ourselves. Let's keep the focus on the promotion in Japan. And that's what the media was willing to do. They do call him, to some degree, the Andre the Giant of the 1960s because he was abnormally large. He was a giant, and there weren't that many giants wrestling at the time.
Until I read that, I never looked at it that way, but I also never realized how long straight through that Baba worked in the States, and we'll get into that before we close out the show here this week. But that 20-month run straight through in the States, I mean, all of the major cities he was hitting over and over, Chicago, New York, D.C., Los Angeles. I mean, he was getting around, and he was drawing, and he was working all of the top stars.
I agree. I don't know if he's lucky or it just made sense, because when you're the size of Baba, it's easy to book you anywhere because you're a giant. You're going to draw attention, not from your wrestling ability, not from your name, not from a belt you have, from your size. You're just enormous. The fact you're a good wrestler, that adds to it, but anyone can book a giant. Booking giants is easy. You can book the match. It makes sense. Putting the giant over for being a giant. This is all kind of cookie cutter promotional stuff. And the fact that Bob is as big as he is made it easy for him to be successful no matter where he went, because even a bad booker knows how to book a giant. And I think that's a huge benefit for Baba coming in, even though he may not speak the language, he comes from another country. The kind of matches he's being booked into are a lot easier to promote. So he's just seeing success everywhere he turns, and that works out really well for him. And the fact that he's a good wrestler is just icing on the cake, because he could get away with doing a lot less, and they would still push him and still put him over and still promote him the same way.
Right, yeah. I don't know if you mind, I want to stop here on the May 11th show. I had a couple of matches highlighted on my end I wanted to cover. On that show, during the World League matchup, Thesz is going to score a win over Mr. Atomic here, and I have in my notes, and I don't know, I didn't see him pop up again. It says this is Mr. Atomic's final match of the tour, if maybe his final match in Japan, at least until after the passing of Rikidozan. So I think you have some notes about that. I'll let you get into that in a little bit. But also on the May 11th show, the main event, if you want to talk about that, I don't believe any of the titles are on the line, but Rikidozan coming in there as the WWA World Champion, as the International Champion, as the All-Asia Champion, taking on the former NWA World Champion, Dick Hutton.
Yeah, it's all these titles are referred to in the match description, but the damning part is in the very beginning, in parentheses, saying non-title.
Right.
So they mention all these titles that everybody has, and then said, for none of these titles, these two guys are going to wrestle.
Which is, really odd given the finish. I don't know why they couldn't have just claimed that the title was on the line.
I don't get it. Now, maybe somebody wanted money and said, I'm not going to put up my title unless I can't get it. It's booking. It's weird. I don't know. There could be egos involved or money involved, or maybe there's an agreement with the WWA title that it can only be defended this many times and to these people. Maybe Joe Strongbow doesn't want some kind of swerve where Rikidozan goes, oops, Dick Hutton gave me $20,000, and now just strangely enough, he happened to beat me for the WWA title, and now Hutton's returning to America with the WWA title.
I enjoyed the first fall of this match between Rikidozan and Hutton, though, as Hutton going to make Rikidozan submit to the old over-the-shoulder Canadian backbreaker. That first fall going 17 minutes, but Rikidozan not just taking a loss, but a submission loss.
Yeah, and that is not normal for him. He does not take many falls, and he takes less submissions. So the fact that on May 11th, he takes a submission as the very first fall. The second fall, Rikidozan would defeat Hutton by a count out of ring, 5 minutes, 14 seconds. And apparently something must have happened outside the ring that resulted in not only the count out of ring, but also Hutton not even being able to return to the ring, because the third fall, Rikidozan wins in 0 seconds by default. So that sounds to me, if I'm looking at this correctly, it sounds to me like Hutton ended up out of the ring, never made it back in for the second fall, and still never made it back in for the third.
Yeah, unable to continue.
As you said, after the May 11th show, that was the last appearance of Mr. Atomic while Rikidozan was still in charge of the promotion.
Okay.
He would return to Japan in 1967 and would make tours in 1969 and 1970. So Clyde Steve's Mr. Atomic is going to be gone for a while. But we will move on to words from Thesz. He shared a story about this tour. Quote, we were in Osaka, 1962. Fred, Blassie, and I were doing some shopping for gifts to take home. We were very visible personalities at the time. Freddie was working a lot with Rikidozan and doing the vampire bit, filing his teeth with a nail file. It was no surprise that we drew a crowd, mostly kids. There must have been 100 of them following us. We were looking for a china shop, one that Rikidozan had told us about, where we could buy at reduced prices. And they finally found it. It was a big china shop. Fred, Blassie, and Thesz bought their china. And as they turned to leave, there was an ocean of kids jamming the aisles. They were just staring at Blassie. Blassie got this diabolical look on his face and said to me, watch this. As he stood there glaring at the kids, he slowly reached into his pocket, pulled out a nail file, and began filing his teeth. You could have heard a pin drop. It was so quiet in that store. The kids were transfixed, frozen in place. Suddenly, Freddie roared and jumped at the kids. The poor kids panicked and headed for the door, knocking over china left and right.
Oh.
They broke the place to bits. Freddie was in shock. He grabbed me by the arm and said, let's get out of here.
I don't want to pay for this.
Yeah, Thesz said, I just laughed. Why should I run? You're the one who did this. he was pulling on me then, so I let him lead me out the door. Later, Rikidozan told me that the shop's owner was on the phone to him before we'd probably even gone a block. He said he had to make a very hefty settlement with the guy to calm him down. I looked at it like this. I figured those kids had at least helped the shopkeeper get rid of a lot of unwanted inventory. So that's a funny little story right from the words of Thesz himself about him and Fred Blassie having fun in Japan and Osaka way back in 1962, scaring all the kids and destroying a good portion of a china shop.
Looks like there's another little midgets tour here with Primo Carnera on the card also coming through. Not for the JWA, but I see some notes here.
Yeah, this was a totally separate tour, different than JWA. And like you said, Primo Carnera and some little people appeared in the ring to publicize their tour. According to an advertisement, 10 of them: Skylo Low, Fuzzy Cupid, Little Beaver, Tiny Tim, Brown Panther, Irish Jackie, Farmer Pete, Little Brutus, Pancho, Lopez, and Andy Moore wrestled in 5 cities in Japan from May 12th to May 19th. Primo Carnera would serve as a referee, and 10 Japanese female wrestlers would be on the undercard. Now, this is something that Rikidozan would want nothing to do with. So even if he never saw them as competition, I assume that they could come and go as they please as far as touring in Japan, because Rikidozan didn't consider that wrestling. He wanted nothing to do with it.
It's funny, as sports entertainment oriented as he is with his storylines, or at least some of the things going on in the ring, he has a line he doesn't cross, which usually includes ladies, midgets, things of that nature.
Yeah, for a guy whose behavior outside the ring seems to have no limits, he does have limits when it comes to promoting pro wrestling.
So the newspapers are saying that Ricky's wrestling is too westernized, but Rikidozan still won't make it completely Americanized because he's more of a Sam Muchnick style, in some ways anyway, because he draws that line.
Yes, he does draw the line. And not counting Fred Blassie, who goes over the top, but he goes over the top in America too. You could look at him as a Sam Muchnick, kind of a suit and tie, watching the wrestling matches kind of situation. If it weren't for the occasional pool match or the occasional riot, that would hold true almost entirely for the run of JWA. But we make it to the final show of the tour, and we had already mentioned that everyone else is fighting each other for the right to face Rikidozan since he's won the prior 3. He's just like, I'm going to be in the finals, so why don't you guys fight and tell me who is going to be the finalist to fight me?
Yeah, it's like Dusty Rhodes winning the Bunkhouse Stampede every year, baby. And now it's Rikidozan, 3 World Leagues in a row, and so he goes straight to the finals. And why don't you tell them who the opponent is, Dan?
He's the bull of the woods, baby. It would be Thesz, the 4th annual World League final, best 2 out of 3 falls, 61-minute time limit. Referee Oki Shikina. Rikidozan defeats Thesz 2 falls to 1 to win the tournament. Thesz pins Rikidozan 12 minutes 33 seconds. 2 minutes later, Rikidozan pins Thesz. And there is a question on how long the 3rd fall goes, but Rikidozan pins Thesz in the 3rd and final fall to win 2 falls to 1, winning his 4th consecutive World League tournament.
Yes, Grand Slam winner now, 4 in a row. There have been 4 World Leagues. Rikidozan somehow miraculously wins them all, this time defeating the former and future NWA World Champion, Thesz.
Yeah, before the Tiger Slam, you have the Riki Slam.
There you go.
4 titles in a row.
Now I'm envisioning Thesz do Dusty Rhodes and sing Bull of the Woods, but that's neither here nor there.
I like the concept of him putting on the jeans and the outrageous boots and everything. And I thought Big Bubba was really good. At that point, Big Bubba was really ascending.
Yes.
Fast in the promotion. And it was all Dusty. Dusty just loved Bubba, except for the one time he almost killed one of the jobbers on TV. And after the match, he ran into the locker room after the match and just said, "If you can't do it, don't do it." If you know what the hell you're doing, don't kill one of these guys just because you invent a move on the spot there.
Right, yeah.
But other than that, Dusty made Big Bubba. He took that chair shot over the head and it just repositioned his hat. You could do that 100 times and not have it come out that perfect on TV.
Yeah, what a great shot that was.
Dusty was like, he was gifted and he was blessed at the same time, because only in wrestling could Dusty get away with that and have it work out perfectly. And Dusty backed off from him too. Talk about putting a guy over.
Yeah, I've never seen anything like that. What am I in here with, baby? Big Bubber. And,
yep. Who else thought you were going to be talking about Big Bubba Rogers and NWA Crockett Wrestling?
It's always a good time to talk about Big Bubba. I was a Boss Man fan, man. I'll take any Big Bubba. Well, maybe not 1990s Big Bubba, but that's a whole nother world.
That cage match is still an excellent cage match. That might be the best Hogan cage match I've ever seen.
Oh yeah,
didn't he have a cage match against Hogan?
Yeah,
that was great. I liked
at the Garden and on Saturday night's main event. They did it a couple times on TV.
I definitely liked it better than the one that Hogan had with Paul Orndorff, where they tried to do the split screen to see who hit the floor the fastest.
That was clever, though. That was clever.
It was interesting, but I hate that finish. So now you're making me watch a finish I don't like twice. I said, I don't like either one of you trying to escape the cage. You shouldn't have to escape anything. You should have to fight.
Yes.
I hate it.
Should I blame New York rules? Blame the New York rules. There you go.
All right.
Can't blame Bruno because he didn't climb over the top. He always wanted to go through the door. He was no fool.
That's true. All right. So we made it through the World League, which ended on the end of May 25th.
Yeah.
And 2 days later, we're just not getting this whole tour concept. 2 days later, they're going to start the next one, Pro Wrestling International Selection Tournament. 27 shows from May 27th to July 1st. Now, I'm doing the math. There's only 30 days in June, so in 35 days, they're going to have 27 shows. Wow. That is a busy tour coming off of a busy tour. So let's see who they're actually going to pay to keep, though, in this tour. They're going to keep Buddy Austin. Did they have him before? They have Mike Sharpe, Duke Hoffman, and for part of the tour, Great Togo and Ricky Waldo. So they're keeping some of the guys. They've got some of the guys from the prior tours of the year, but not a huge group. In fact, they're only keeping Ricky Waldo for the last 2 weeks of June.
Well, he is a vagabond after all.
He is a vagabond. That is very true. But him and Luther Lindsay, they're like this. They're like this together.
Yeah.
Cousins, I tell you. So they're going to try to squeeze 27 house shows out of what is legitimately 4 outsiders. So we're going to scan through these looking for attendances of note or title matches, title changes.
Match here, June the 4th, JWA All Asia Tag Team titles on the line.
Okay, and it is, of course, the main event of the evening, the JWA All Asia Tag Team Championship match. Best 2 out of 3 falls, 61-minute time limit. Referee Oki Shikina, who seems to have a new job. He's only reffing now. Buddy Austin and Mike Sharpe defeat Rikidozan and Toyombori 2 falls to 1 to become the new champions. Boy, this All Asia Tag Team Championship is like a hot potato in Japan.
Wildfire, baby. Somebody say something about title change. And
okay, well, this one's in Osaka, so they had a title change in one of their most popular towns. If it's not Tokyo, Osaka is the next place that you're going to draw 10, 15,000 people. This one's in Osaka Prefectural Gym in front of 10,000 people. And they do a title change there. Both teams double count out at 17 minutes. Mike Sharpe pins Rikidozan in 1 minute, 11 seconds. So with a double count out, they're both assigned 1 fall because it's double.
Okay.
And then a minute later, Sharpe gets a pin on Rikidozan. I would like to have watched this on TV. I suspect there's more of an explanation to it other than Sharpe just pinning somebody in 1 minute.
What you want to guess before this tour ends that somebody's going to get their win back?
I'm willing to bet all of Rikidozan's money that win's coming back. So we'll move on through June all the way to July 1st. I'm scanning, looking for attendances of note. A lot of 7,000s, 6,000s, 5,500, nothing small yet. Look at this. The good old vacant lot shows. Those are always good. I'm just going to note this one. There was a show that was scheduled for the 13th of June in Matsuyama City at the vacant lot at Mitakaramachi.
How do you tally the fans in a vacant lot, Dan?
That's a great guess. It depends on how you're paying the wrestlers is what I would say. If you're paying them off the house, then you're going to assume that not a lot of guys showed up, so you can skim off the top. But 2,500 people came to a vacant lot. I'm not sure I really consider that in the same vein as a traditional tour where they're actual venues, so to speak.
Right.
I'm scrolling all the way. I'm getting to June 1st. I've seen enough of this. It's all in our insanely detailed show notes. If you really want to see what Koichi Hayashi is doing to Tatsuo Hoshino in the opening curtain-jerking match of a random show in Yakusaka.
Some people might care that Ueda is now wrestling for the JWA as well. I'm not sure really where he picked up, but he's now part of these tours as well. And he'll be,
oh my goodness.
He'll be around for quite a while to come.
Is he already on this tour? Oh,
Hiroshi,
I'm looking at
Hiroshi
it right now.
Ueda. Yeah, he hasn't changed his name yet.
Yeah, and he wouldn't change it to the more easily pronounceable Yamanasiki.
Right. That's coming too. That's going to come when Inoki changes his, Ueda will change his. I think that may be in your notes here still, but yeah.
It is. There it is. The final show of the tour, of this tour, July 1st, back in Osaka, 12,000 people. But this one isn't in the prefectural gym. It's in Daimon Park. So apparently there's more room for more folks there. In the main event of the evening for the JWA All Asia Tag Team Championship, you know who's in it. Rikidozan and Toriumori would defeat Buddy Austin and Mike Sharpe 2 straight falls, which is how this usually happens, to get their title back. Rikidozan's got to count out a ring against Buddy Austin in 16 minutes, and then Rikidozan pins Sharpe in 2 minutes 45 seconds. So He did it. It took him longer than 1 minute and 11, but he got his pin back on Sharpe to get the title back. So that kind of undoes what happened when they lost the title in my book.
Right. It rights the wrong here in Japan.
Yeah, and evens it up, so to speak. And now all those folks can go home happy, and Rikidozan and Toriumori keep the belts, because how else would it really work? That tour being over, they actually take a break of note. From July 1st, the last show of this tour, they would not start the next tour for almost 3 weeks. The competitions of the summer, starting July 20th, going to September 7th. Now, this one is run on a budget, it appears, because we only have 3 outsiders participating in it: Skull Murphy, Gorilla Marconi, and Ricky Waldo. Now, we know Skull Murphy. We know Ricky Waldo.
I'll tell you a little bit about Frank Marconi if you want to know a little information here, Dan. Gorilla Marconi, he's going to be here on this tour, born in 1917 in Salem, Ohio. So do a little math here on his age. He predated television wrestling, as you might imagine. He debuted back in 1937, a big burly guy. There's still some footage of him out there. Worked all the way into 1977, and he's a very similar look to Skull Murphy, the bald head and whatnot. And as you said, Skull Murphy on this tour, coming out of Hamilton, Ontario, is about to make it big in New York City, just a moment away, with Brute Bernard, the big tag team there in the Capital Wrestling at the time. It's right before his big break in D.C., New York. So he's about, not that he wasn't already getting pushed in other territories, but he's about to hit it big in the Northeast.
All right, so we're seeing him right as he's about to explode in America, and we get to see him in this summer tour from the end of July to the beginning of September. And scrolling through, looking for any kind of title matches. We've got TV matches, of course.
We do have one title match, but it's taking place in Los Angeles on July 25th. 1962, Rikidozan returns to the States to defend his WWA title against Fred Blassie. Blassie going to regain the WWA title by referee stoppage, claiming that Rikidozan had the doctor come in, check him out, and said excessive bleeding. Now, in my book, not exactly excessive bleeding, but that's what the story called for, and Blassie regaining the title. So Rikidozan, by July 25th, no longer the WWA World Champion.
Well, that's a shame, but $25,000 only gets you so much. And $10,000 gets you even less.
Man, I'm not buying this $25,000, man. I'm doing the math here, and I'm doing a little calculator inflation in my head and just guesstimating what that might be today, and that's a lot of money to pretend to be you were a world champion for a couple months.
Yeah, maybe when we get to the NWA title changes in All Japan in the 70s, if we can find any information on what that was costing. I've only heard of putting up money for belts much later than 1962, but the numbers are kind of similar. So it doesn't make sense that 25,000 would be a number that be talked about. That seems like an awful lot of money for what really is just a temporary title reign for a relatively new title. It's not like he's asking for the NWA title here. He's asking for a title that didn't even exist a year before.
Yeah.
So it does seem a little extravagant, but whatever percentage Great Togo stole from that amount, right. I totally believe that amount.
Yeah, that part I'm totally on board for. Oh, man, I love wrestling.
Yeah.
September 14th, I see you have some notes lined up here for this tour.
Yeah, we got through that summer tour. There were only 7 shows in the tour. All of them were televised. So we're back to that, saying, I'm not really interested in running a tour, but I'll run it if you're going to pay me. Mm-hmm. If the network's going to give me a check just so I can run a show. And that's what he did. And they didn't have huge attendances here. At Riki Sports Palace, the most you're going to draw was around 3,000 people. But it doesn't cost anything because you own the building.
Right.
So these are all pure money makers, and he only had to pay 3 outsiders to even participate. So this is easy money for Rikidozan to throw together the tour, and we'll go to the international competitions of the fall series, which would pick up the week after that other tour ended. And this one goes from the middle of September all the way to the beginning of November. And then there's an Okinawa series that's kind of tacked on that would run for an additional week going to November 9th. Now, this one's got some interesting foreigners that are participating. We've got Big Moose Cholak, Art Mikulik, Skull Murphy sticking around, Gorilla Marconi sticking around. Chief Big Heart would come in October and last to the end of the tour in November. And Larry Jackson would come in only for the first 2 days of the tour.
It's been a while since Art Mikulik was here, but Skull Murphy, like you said, stuck around. Gorilla Marconi is sticking around. Larry Jackson's back because he just never goes away, does he? Yeah. But a couple of new names here in Japan. Big Moose, that's what he's going under here for this tour anyway. Moose Cholak. First a gorilla, now a moose. So Gorilla Marconi, now we have a moose here also in Japan. Yet he doesn't want midgets, Dan, but it is what it is. So yeah. Cholak from Chicago, about a decade in the business by this point. Career really lasted throughout Chicago, WWA in Indianapolis, and the AWA territories. Never really left the Midwest, but very well known because of Chicago Wrestling TV, the Dumont Network, and whatnot. Cholak would wrestle into the 1980s. And I'm not saying he should have kept wrestling in the 1980s, but he was still around. And there's even a fun, the Mantar gimmick where he comes out with like the buffalo head. They stole that idea from Cholak. If you guys go and look at some of the 50s footage, Cholak coming out with a giant moose head that was so large it was bigger than him. And he was a big guy. It was kind of scary. Like, if that was a legitimate moose, man, I don't know what I would have done. I would have shat myself if I'd seen that thing. It was so big. But
that moose head was ridiculously large.
It was larger than the ropes.
I mean, you must have to buy a seat for it on the plane. How do you ship that thing?
That's why he never left the Midwest, because he wouldn't give up that hat. I'm telling myself that.
He didn't have a car big enough to travel with it.
I put it on the top. There you go. And then Chief Big Heart, he, like you said, he's going to be here for half the tour from October through the November portion. He debuted back in 1951, through and through, a true Native American from Pawhuska, Oklahoma, I'll have you know. Worked everywhere from Texas to St. Louis, various Canadian territories, Georgia, and so forth. Spent some time in Native American tag teams. And then also not only being in tag teams, but competing against all of the top tag teams of the time, the Tolis brothers, the Golden Grahams, the Sharpe brothers, and he once even teamed with Bruno Sammartino in a main event there against Bill Watts and Bill Miller for the WWF. So Chief Big Heart had made some rounds.
Yeah, it sounds like he's wrestled with all the big stars over there. Mm-hmm. Well, all right, so that's good. So we know who we're dealing with here. And this tour is a little interesting for one reason. You're getting right out of the blocks and already you're having problems. So it's related to this main event, and I'll just tell you about the main event first. It's for the All Asia Tag Team Championship.
This is September 14th?
September 14th, the very first show of the tour. Rikidozan Toyonbori wrestled Skull Murphy and Gorilla Marconi to a draw. Both teams went to a no contest in 19 minutes. Now, there's more to the story. An incident occurred at the Tokyo Metropolitan Gymnasium on September 14th. On this day, Rikidozan and Toyonbori faced off against Murphy and Marconi to defend the All Asia Tag Team Championships. Rikidozan was the victim of a lot of illegal attacks from the evil foreign team. And the referee, Oki Shikina, was fed up with all these attacks, and he actually applied a full Nelson to Skull Murphy. Rikidozan hit Oki with a powerful chop. So what this looks like is he was trying to chop Murphy, but ended up hitting Oki Shikina.
Right.
That's how I'm perceiving it.
Yes, absolutely.
Rikidozan's chop hits Oki's chest, knocking him down. Skull Murphy then hits the referee with a knee drop from the top corner post, knocking him out completely.
Wow.
Then Moose and Art Mihalik burst in. With 6 fighters in the ring, it becomes a lawless zone. We got a Pier 6 brawl here.
I got to start using that one, a lawless zone. I got to write that down somewhere.
Rikidozan goes down with a headbutt from Murphy. Torian Bori is knocked out by a tackle from Mihalik. Moose launches a flying body press at the 2 of them. Ouch. Ugh. That is a big load. As a result of that attack, Rikidozan suffers a serious injury with a subluxation of the right sternoclavicular joint, requiring 4 weeks of recovery.
Who wrote this? Gorilla Monsoon?
I don't know. This is maybe
subluxation of a sternoclavicular, whatever you just said.
I think it's his clavicle. It's his. That's all it is.
Yeah.
Rikidozan will have to take a break from the next 4 tournaments. I think they mean 4 shows. I don't know. So he can't be the ace, but Japan's ace can't stay out of the matches forever, and he will eventually return to the ring, and we'll talk about that when we get to those matches.
Okay.
But we'll talk about Torian Bori, though, because now Torian Bori is in the position of having to be the star while Rikidozan is injured. And he'd been taking part of the main event every day, but he had a sprain in his left ankle that was just getting worse. And that was becoming a problem. And he had eventually had to withdraw from a show later on in this tour. And with the consent of the challengers, Michiaki Yoshimura was asked to substitute for him in the Asia Tag Team title defense, which would come up later in October. So injuries everywhere. Everyone's hurt. It's mass hysteria. And I'm not surprised because they've been running virtually nonstop for the last 8 months. It's been crazy. One tour ends, you get 2 days off, the next tour begins.
It was a little light at the beginning. They were kind of spreading things out for TV throughout the winter, but yeah, man, by the time the spring ended and summer hit, we were doing like the World League, and then the next tour was like 30-some shows and 40-some days. This last one was like 40-some shows. This one we're in right now, I believe, it's like 40-some shows and 50-some days, so it's kind of crazy, man. It's like nonstop right now.
Yeah, so we'll just shoot along through this autumn campaign and see what we have. The very first show after that 14th of September show, the 15th of September, Rikidozan isn't even at the show. So that's not good. It still draws 7,000 people, but it may have been advance tickets. You don't want Rikidozan off the shows for too long because they're not going to buy tickets.
Right. I don't think he returns till the 19th.
No, it's a while. But luckily, even on the 17th, he's still looking good. They're drawing 10,000, 11,000 people in Japan. In Tokyo, the 18th, they're drawing 10,000 or 12,000 in Nagoya. Not only this show was so big in Nagoya City that 2,000 people were outside of the arena trying to get in and couldn't get in. It was that packed.
Turned them away.
Up until we finally get to the 19th of September in Osaka. It's always Osaka. 10,000 people or so. Finally, the Rikidozan returns with Torian Bori, and this is a 6-man match, so he's got Michiaki Yoshimura too, and they go against Moose, Skull Murphy, and Art Mihalik. It goes 2 falls to 1, but unfortunately for the returning Rikidozan, his team loses. Torian Bori would get the first fall by pinning Murphy, but Moose would beat Rikidozan via DQ at 118. So at least it's a DQ that Rikidozan loses by. And then after that, they don't even really go to the third fall because the entire heel team wins by DQ somehow. So it's probably just like a crazy brawl at the end is what I'm guessing. Mm-hmm. One note about this, though, the returning Rikidozan, he returns wearing football shoulder pads because he's trying to protect his clavicle that has been injured and is not fully healed yet.
Yeah, his first 2 matches back here, 19th and the 20th, I see in your notes where you had marked that he was wearing American football shoulder pads, and he was legally allowed to wrestle in them. So, again, talking about Western wrestling.
Well, it makes sense, too, because if he had it injured and wasn't fully healed yet, these heels would go right at it, right from the beginning of the match, and there's really no way to protect it. So it's smart that he did it. Luckily, the commission, so to speak, allowed him to wear that kind of gear.
I tried to highlight the title matches. There really aren't any in this tour, just a lot of shows.
They'll do a lot of these 10-minute time limit draws for the first 3 matches or 4 matches of the shows. Mm-hmm. I'm surprised it's a 10-minute time limit. A lot of these guys have been wrestling for a while. You'd think they'd be able to go longer, but Maybe they just want to feature everybody that's on the roster. This roster is really big. I'll just pick one show, October 11th. 14 matches and not a single outsider is involved.
Crazy.
The first 7 matches of the show, and it's all native wrestler, JWA wrestler versus JWA wrestler, ostensibly to be fighting, jockeying for position in the hierarchy. I guess he should be happy about it is right before you start getting into the outsiders matches, you see Kanji Inoki defeating Nagasawa by submission on October 11th. So at least Inoki's been pushed right up into the area before the semi-main event. So I don't think he can complain too much after only wrestling 2 years. He's already that high on the card.
And it's like you said, man, almost every card averages around 10 matches per card. I mean, that's a lot of wrestling. And so they're able to make the matches a little shorter, keep the interest in there, and bring out more stars, put on more talent out there, and pay more talent as well in order to get there. Yeah, I'm not sure if this is a title match or not. I'm not seeing the words non-title. Oh, here it is, non-title. Okay, maybe it was the wrestlers involved that caught my eye then.
Yeah, Rikidozan versus the Big Moose. Here's a little prediction game for you. If it's the last show of the tour and Rikidozan's in that main event and it's a best of 3 falls, you should know the answer to this already. Rikidozan wins 2 falls to nothing no matter what.
Right.
And this streak would not change. He defeats Moose. The Big Moose, 10 minutes, 29 seconds for a pin. The second fall never really gets started. Rikidozan wins the second fall by DQ.
And I see why I highlighted that, because as you get going in this next tour, I'm not going to jump ahead, but they're going to have a rematch for the title. So I think that's why I highlighted on my notes that particular match, because there's going to be a return bout between those two.
That is one advantage to having no space in between these tours, is that you can keep outsiders over from one tour to the next, and you don't have to pay for them to fly home and fly back. So I think it might save them money just to keep these guys and carry them over to the next tour. And they would do that with Big Moose, Moose Cholak, and Art Mikulik, Skull Murphy, Gorilla Marconi, and Chief Big Heart. This is the Okinawa series I'm looking at. It's just a 1-week extension of the prior tour.
Right.
But there's something to note. When this Okinawa series starts, Kanji Inoki was forced to change his ring name to Antonio Inoki.
There it begins.
And Ueda Yuji to Yamanosuke Ueda. I'm going to guess that all the shows are in Okinawa. I know that Okinawa was a big military base there, so maybe this is a tour for the boys, so to speak, at GHQ.
Was there a big reason ever given why Inoki had to be renamed from Kanji Inoki to Antonio Inoki?
My understanding in what I read was that they were trying to give him the gimmick of being from Brazil.
Okay.
Like to enhance his Brazilian status. Even though he was only on there a couple of years.
Yeah.
But that's where he was discovered.
Yeah.
It's a way to enhance him. If they say, hey, we want to change your name, it's like, thanks for thinking of me. Yeah. And he's already almost at the semi-main event. So if the promotion wants to give him a little bit of flair or flavor in his name, they're only doing it for one reason, and that's to move him up. So this is a good thing in my book. Changing Yuji Ueda to Yamanosuke Ueda, that's a mouthful. I'm not sure that helps.
I've only known him as Yamanosuke Ueda, so it flows off my tongue a little faster, I guess. But I agree.
I like Ueda's matches because he is a legit big dude, and I hear that he's a bit of a hooker. He is a legit wrestler who can do damage to you. He knows nasty tricks, and he's known for that.
That kind of hooker. Never mind. All right.
Yeah. No, we're not talking about what Strong Kobayashi would get into in the 70s.
Oh, no.
And maybe we never will. There's parts of Japanese wrestling history that none of you need to know about. Don't even go looking. Don't Google that, please.
I love it.
So we'll get into this Okinawa series. It's only 6 shows. The first show's on November 3rd. It's a national holiday, and it's in Okinawa. The vacant lot at the rear of the Naha bus terminal, behind the door, and somehow at a vacant parking lot at the back of a bus terminal, they drew 12,000 people.
I love
the smoke. I love
the description. I mean, they're telling you exactly where the event is located.
You can't get any more accurate. You could Google map this and you could find out where this show was all the way from almost over 60 years ago. You could probably find this on Google Map.
I've heard Buck Robley in the mid 80s promote outlaw wrestling shows without that much information as to where his shows were being held. So that is phenomenal.
Just you drive around till you start hearing yelling. That's where we're at.
Somewhere in LaGrange, Louisiana. Go down there and find it somewhere and figure out the time, because I'm not going to announce any of that as I promote the show.
All right. So we thought we did well in the back in the Naha bus terminal on the 3rd of November. On the 4th of November, they would do it again, and that time they would draw 15,000 people.
This is it's got to be the entire bus terminal. Are they shutting down the buses?
I don't know. It's a happening. That's all I know. Gorilla told me it's a happening.
This is indeed a happening, Dan. Absolutely.
That is ridiculous. You won't believe this. On the 5th, same thing, same place, 17 or 18,000 people.
Is this the same bus terminal every time?
They have to be lying to me. Yeah, it's Naha City. It's the.
Are the buses bringing the people in? Is that the gimmick here? Is that how they're drawing these?
I don't understand how you can fit that many people.
God bless Okinawa. My goodness.
Imagine, I would love to see all of this on TV, but to see 18,000 people in a parking lot behind a bus terminal, I'd like to see what that looks like on television.
I got to call this into question just a little bit. Those numbers seemed, I don't know, played with a little. I don't know. I mean, I wasn't there, so I can't say for certain, but that is absolutely insane. And they're going to go back there again on the 8th. And then finally we pull into the 9th. And we do get that international heavyweight title match as Big Moose Cholak comes back for revenge on Rikidozan, and the international title on the line this time.
Did you say this is the last show of a tour?
Yeah, the 6-card tour, right? November 9th.
Okay, and Rikidozan's in the main event?
Yes, he is.
I wonder how this turns out.
Well, they couldn't do it again, right? I mean, they just did this 6 shows ago, right? So.
Oh, yes, they can. 2 falls to nothing. Rikidozan beats him by a count out of ring at around 11 minutes. And then the second fall, he pins Moose Cholak in 1 minute 58 seconds.
Well, at least he let him back in the ring anyway to do the pin. So Rikidozan 2 straight falls into another tour. He should just have a new tour every week and just keep going over 2 straight falls. That would be fun. So we conclude another tour, and then we pick up another tour, another 6-card tour. This is absolutely insane. And this one it looks like they're going back to TV. So it feels like when they get to the winter, they pull away from actual touring, all these big, long tours, and it's just taping for TV mostly here, because over the next, from November 16th through December 28th, the international competitions of winter, at least the part that takes place here in 1962, 6 cards. And again, they're just keeping a couple of the guest foreigners, Art Michalik and Chief Big Heart, but also the familiar Jess Ortega, Bull Ortega, returning to the promotion here in Japan. He had some fun matches with Ricky in the past.
Yeah, he did. And I think that this is promoting Jess Ortega coming back is kind of it provides a little bit of interest for what otherwise is going to be 6 cards run at the Riki Sports Palace just to kind of end the year. I'm sure they're all going to be televised. So to provide a little more interest than seeing Art Michalik for the 4th tour and Chief Big Heart, who only wrestles the first day of the tour, and that's it. So in reality, they only have 2 outsiders for the remaining 5 cards of this 6-card tour. Jess Ortega is just the shot in the arm that I think the promotion needs. Now, if it's in Riki Sports Palace, their attendance is limited to around 3,000 is the max you're going to jam in there. So we'll see if they're all sellouts. I'm assuming they are. They're all going to be on TV. And we're going to finish the remainder of the year with just some TV tapings. We have non-title matches for the tag championship, which if you're going to do that, think about the rest of the card. You're using the 2 guys in the main event, the 2 outsiders. Mm-hmm. Who's left to fight? You've got the semi-main is Michiaki Yoshimura versus Mammoth Suzuki. You got Kokichi Endo with Kintaro Oki, and you have Antonio Inoki versus Nagasawa. This is not to surprise anybody. These are the top guys that are in that 2nd tier, and we already know that Torian is still nursing that injury, but you've just seen the hierarchy of JWA right now, and it really hasn't changed that much. Rikidozan, Torian Kokichi Endo is the number 1 guy. Michiaki Yoshimura is finally getting some more recognition. Mammoth Suzuki is kind of the newcomer, so to speak.
Yeah, they sent him over with Baba initially to the States, but it looks like Suzuki's back and Baba's gonna stay over in the States. He'll be back in Japan somewhere around March or April of 63.
Yep. So we are getting to see a push from the returning Mammoth Suzuki from his U.S. excursion. And this is the next level of JWA natives. And then you look at the first 5 matches, and it's the same guys just all randomly picked, randomly wrestling, all bucking to move up a rung or two on the ladder.
Yeah.
And you're going to see a lot of that for all these shows. And they're all at the Riki Sports Palace, and they're all 3,000 people for attendance, and they're all showing up on TV, but I'm not seeing any title matches.
Last couple shows on the tour have some fun main events. The 21st, it's got Ortega in there with Yoshimura, so they're giving Yoshimura a little more of a bump here, working the main event against Bull Ortega, and it looks like Ortega going to go over in 2 straight falls there, count out and a pinfall, so they're keeping him hot. I'm assuming he's going to stick around for the other half of this winter tour at the beginning of 63. I haven't looked ahead, but methinks if Rikidozan ever steps back in the ring during this tour, that we may still get the Bull Ortega. Since he's getting built up the way he is here on these matches, it feels like they're setting something up for the other half of this tour, which I'm assuming will continue into January, maybe even into February of next year.
Yeah, and I'm not even seeing on this December 21st show, I'm not seeing Rikidozan anywhere.
No,
do you?
No.
I do know the prior match, the match from in this case, it was 2 weeks before, the main event, the outsider team of Ortega and Mikulik won by default in 13:55, and that was against Rikidozan and Torianbori. I wonder if there's some kind of injury here that takes him out, and it would be for 2 weeks because he had 2 weeks to recover, and he's still not on this December 21st show. Let's see if he shows up on the 28th.
He does as a referee. There's a 10-man spectacle battle royal featuring Rikidozan as the referee.
Wow, look at all these guys in it too. Wait a second. Who's Baron von Hexy?
Hungarian wrestler. I don't know a whole lot about him, but he worked like Australia and things of that nature.
Tony Alford.
He'd been here before. He's one of those, Alfred's one of those servicemen that we've seen here before.
Oh, okay. From General Headquarters. All right. That makes sense. All right. They just snuck a couple names in there that weren't considered part of the tour of outside members. So
yeah,
they snuck them in. They needed 2 more people to fill out a 10-man battle royal.
Sure. Why not?
Yeah. It works. Battle royals are always fun, and they're ending the year with a battle royal. So it's almost like a spectacle. Although these battle royals are different than the battle royals from America. These battle royals, you see them normally in All Japan promotion. We'll have them at the very beginning of the year. And they're a little bit different where you can pin people and you can have 5 guys all on top of one guy to try to pin him, and the referee will count that pin, and you get eliminated by getting pinned. There isn't a throw over the rope type option. So at some point it turns into an actual match where the winner gets pinned. And in this particular case, Torianbori and Jesse Ortega were the last 2 folks, and they wrestled to a double count out of ring at 28 minutes and 12 seconds. So that's a long battle royal.
Again, Ortega goes over Yoshimura the night before or the week before, and here he comes back out, and he goes to essentially a draw with Tayanobori, who is, without Rikidozan wrestling, Tayanobori is one of the next men up. So it's another big night for Bull Ortega. He's getting built up, but also, we see some of the other top stars of the JWA thriving right now.
Yep. And also, one thing we should think about is these mini tours in between bigger tours that are only existing to get TV tapings. Don't forget, there's a network with a check handed out to Rikidozan. All he has to do is hold a show that they can put a TV camera in front of. And towards the end of the year, when he really doesn't want to have a full-blown tour in the winter, he can at least go to the Riki Sports Palace and run these shows every week or every 2 weeks in order to have TV taping money.
Or a bus station.
Yeah, well, gosh, I can't imagine how much he made for that. So there's multiple ways now Rikidozan is making money and keeping solvent in the JWA between the network revenue that's coming in, the outrageously successful World League, and I don't know about this whole bus station thing in Okinawa. This seems insane to me. But if it's legit, that's a huge moneymaker. I don't know why they don't go over there more often. I know it's a separate island, I believe.
We're going to have to try to look into that a little deeper and see if we can pull anything out of that. But yeah, it's very interesting. That little, just brief, if you want to call it a tour, those 6 shows there. And I think 5 out of the 6 of that little tour there were in the bus station, which is just really crazy. Not so much running it in a bus station. I've seen wrestling shows in freaking Kmart parking lots. But to claim the draw, the numbers that they were claiming there, that's where I'm curious. So I'm going to try to do a little digging myself into that as well. I don't know if we can come up with much more information, it being 1962, but I'm really curious. You've definitely piqued my interest with that.
Yeah, how can't you when they start at 10,000, then 12, then 15, then 17 or 18,000? It's like, stop it. There's no way it can be that many people at a parking lot out behind a bus station. That doesn't even make sense.
Well, we've ran through nearly 80 pages of notes here. Anybody interested can go on to the Patreon and join the VIP Superfan tier. Look at the crazy, insanely detailed show notes that Dan puts together. I slap some of my notes in there as well. I highlight a few things in between, but really a lot of this is all Dan's work, and appreciate him so much for sending it my way so that I can study it along with him to kind of get ready for these shows. But I took some notes here. We're going to get into what you dubbed the new 3-headed snake before we close out this episode.
Yeah, if you are a follower of the show and listen to our prior podcast episodes, we referenced the 3-headed snake of Rikidozan, Masahiko Kimura, and Toshio Yamaguchi. That's correct. And between the 3 of them, they were the ones that were first starting to promote wrestling shows back in the 50s. And they would wrestle with each other on and off and try to break off and split off and do their own promotions. Each one of them had a particular draw to them. In the end, Rikidozan won out over all 3, although Masahiko Kimura's work was perceived a little differently. He was the one who was taking all the pins on TV. Right. And I think that was Rikidozan, possibly through ego, trying to knock him down in the eyes of public perception, because he knew that Masahiko Kimura could kill him and almost anybody else at that time. He was just so good at judo and was training. His training regimen was ridiculous. He was training 5 hours a day because he was afraid other people that were trying to beat him were training more than him. It was this legendary, the stories of Masahiko Kimura. And Toshio Yamaguchi was also very good, and he had a draw to himself as well. He had charisma. He could run his own promotion. That 3-headed snake no longer exists. It was Rikidozan who won out over both of them. And now we're starting to see what we perceive as a new 3-headed snake forming with the new rookies, or not new rookies now. They've been wrestling 2 years, of Shoei Giant Baba, Antonio Inoki, and Kintaro Oki, where they're all moving up on the card. Baba is doing gangbusters on his American Excursion. And we need to keep track of these 3 guys because they are the movers and shakers, as evidenced by their position on these cards. If it's not Rikidozan and Endo and Toriumbori, you're seeing all these names popping up. So they are the ones to watch out for, so to speak. And we're calling it early because we know enough of the history and we know where some of this leads, that you're not going to want to forget about Baba, Inoki, and Oki.
Yeah, and in the show notes you sent me, at least in the early part of them, because it just went on for so long, the results, I was highlighting Inoki's matches in blue, so anybody can go check these out. You'll see early on, Inoki was working the 4th, the 5th match on a lot of the cards. He was going over or doing draws with just a lot of the random guys. Meanwhile, Oki was a little higher up on the cards here in 62, and he was getting a whole lot of wins. And there were several times they paired the 2 against each other, Oki and Inoki. Almost 9 times out of 10, it was Kintaro Oki going over. The other match might be a draw. I don't know that I ever saw Inoki score a win over Kintaro in this year. It's possible because there's so many results, but I didn't notice it. And so we can kind of see where the pecking order is. Kintaro Oki slightly above Inoki, but like you said, by the end of the year, Antonio Inoki really worked his way up the card. He's not the semi-main yet, but he's getting there. And he was also part of the World League this year as well. Not that he won a whole lot of matches, but even being included shows you they have some plans for him. Meanwhile, Giant Baba was sent to the States, kind of recreating what Rikidozan did before he broke in and started the business in Japan. Sent Baba in July of 61 over to North America. He competed in Los Angeles for the summer. by September through December of 61, Baba was a mainstay working for Vince Sr. in Washington, D.C. and New York City. And he'd do shots in between in Chicago, even work Montreal. Really fun match in December of 61 in Montreal. Listen to this one, Dan. So Baba going to team with, you know this name, Yoshino Sato, who's also on tour over there. They team up. They take a loss, but they can't feel bad about it. Their opponents that night were Bruno Sammartino and Antonino Rocca. What a fun team that would have been.
Holy smokes. That is a huge, huge team. And the, I think it's the Italian aspect of it was, there was a big, Italian population. What was it? Montreal we were talking about?
Yes.
Bigger than you would think.
Yeah.
And
because Dino Bravo was Italian, French and Canadian and Italian.
Yeah. And that was the safe space for Bruno Sammartino after he kind of got blackballed in the States. And he turned that promotion around. He ended up being a major, major deal for them. And I'm just imagining that team of him and Rocca against anybody. Rocca was a star on his own. He didn't need any help.
Right.
So that was like a super team when those two were wrestling. So to take a lot, even to be in the ring for that team, against that team, Baba and Yoshino Sato, who was, I believe, a light heavyweight. Am I correct with that?
Yeah, he had moved up to junior. He moved up to junior right before he went on this excursion. So yeah.
So I'm betting he took at least one of the falls if there was a multi-fall match there.
You'd have to think, but yeah, it was just kind of cool to see where Baba's at. And then throughout 1962, he spent basically the entire year working for the Capital Wrestling, which would become the WWWF, wrestling the likes of Edouard Carpentier, Sweet Daddy Siki, Killer Kowalski, Johnny Valentine, Bearcat Wright. He'd make stops off working for Al Half's territory, which was still pretty big and booming then, in Columbus, Ohio, working the likes of Nature Boy Buddy Rogers, Bobo Brazil, Handsome Johnny Barron. He'd take a drop down to Florida and have a little feud there against the Kentuckians. That's Luke Brown and the father of Jake the Snake Roberts, Grizzly Smith. I've heard some stories. I'm not going to get into those here. Off to Chicago, working the duo of Skull Murphy, who was here in Japan, and Brute Bernard. Back to Montreal, wrestling one-on-one with Bruno, Bulldog Brower, Cowboy Bob Ellis. Again, more Edouard Carpentier. Saw some names here we haven't talked about in quite a while, but they were here on some of the early tours of Japan. Baba against Frank Valois and Ovila Asalin, who I don't think we've seen since the first or second tour of Japan. But he's not done yet. Remember, you had mentioned on the last episode that Baba was going to go do some training with Fred Atkins, and he's going to work Atkins in Pittsburgh, also to Crusher, and Baba versus Haystacks Calhoun. Man, I wish I had that on film.
Oh boy, that must have been an interesting match. I know Baba is very agile and has good movement in 1962, but I'm not sure what he can do to Haystacks. Haystacks is one big dude. That might have been a bit of a spectacle more than a match.
Yeah, but just looking at the names, he's worked everybody, every style, every name, every major city, Pittsburgh, Montreal, Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, D.C. I mean, he really honed his craft before he came back to Japan here in early 63.
Yeah, it's like a whirlwind tour, and he's getting a great education. He's wrestling all the big stars. And we already know he's smart, and we already know he knows how to wrestle. So he's going to come back like a mega star when he does come back. So it's definitely important to keep track of Baba's progress, but just based on this year alone, this guy's primed and ready with just what he's done in the last year or so.
Dare I say he did more than Rikidozan did in the States, because he's working all the territories, all the big cities, and all the stars.
Yeah, it's obvious that he's getting a different treatment as well. And some of that might be the fact that he's just an enormous giant person, and that's super easy to book. And the fact that he can wrestle a little bit and he's being told he needs to be seasoned, these guys are putting him through the motions, and he's learning at the feet of giants here in the wrestling industry. So it's important we keep track of Baba's progress. We've already spoken about Inoki and Oki's progress within JWA this year, moving up to the card, not at the semi-main event level yet, but if there's 10 matches on a show, Inoki's on the 7th match. He does, and there's two ways to perceive a wrestler's status. One is when you see them in a house show and you see how well they do. The other is, for most of the people, what are they doing on TV? Well, you got to get on TV first for them to even know you exist. And in 1962, Antonio Inoki would show up, or Kanji Inoki at that point, would show up 3 different times over the course of the year on television.
Mm-hmm.
On February 9th, it was recorded that day in the Riki Sports Palace. Torimbori would have a match against Kintaro Oki and Kanji Inoki at the same time, kind of a handicap match, just to put over Torimbori a little bit. But hey, better than not getting on TV at all. That would be on February 9th. On August 17th, another live broadcast. The first show, the curtain jerker on that TV episode, Kanji Inoki wrestling Kokichi Endo. So this is interesting. The fact that he's wrestling Rikidozan's number 1 guy. This shows that Rikidozan thought highly of Inoki as well. If you didn't know it by him being on the 7th match or almost the semi-main, he's showing up in what turns out to be the semi-main event of the television episode. If they're having 2 matches, Inoki here is on the first of 2 matches. So that gives him a status that all of those 14 guys below him generally aren't getting. They're not getting any television exposure.
Yeah.
And on the very last episode of the year, December 28th, it was recorded live that same day. We already know he was involved in the spectacular battle royale, they call it. But Inoki was somewhere in that mess. I don't really consider that to be particularly helpful, but at least he's getting on TV. It's better than not getting on TV, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. They could have picked anybody out of that lot to go in a battle royal. So, yeah. So it's kind of a double-edged sword for Inoki because he's watching Baba, who was found a month or 2 after him, get sent off to America to go and hone his craft and become the legendary star he's going to become. Meanwhile, Inoki's stuck in Japan, basically learning from scratch and kind of just working with the local guys. And so I wonder what he was feeling at this point in time, seeing that happen. But at the same time, it also aided Inoki in moving up the card because with Baba gone, they had to rely more on Antonio Inoki. And so he slowly, and over the course of 62, was really where he made some ground. He really started moving his way up the card, going from 4th and 5th to 7th on the card. People go, well, what a big jump. Well, it is because it's that much closer to the main event.
Yep, that is true. And there's a lot of guys to jump over to get to where they are. In the case of Kintaro Oki, he gets on TV maybe 4 more times than Inoki does. So you can kind of see them as peers.
Yes.
And I believe there's an article that I have on a website that chronicles the singles matches between Inoki and Oki. And I don't want to, I'm not 100% sure, but I think Oki wins like the first 15 or something crazy.
That's the way it came off to me when I was going through. I didn't take notes, but I as I was highlighting it, I was reading. I go, wow, Inoki can't get a win, but Oki got most of them, and then there were a few draws in between. And I'm not saying if somebody scrolls through like all 8,000 of these shows and read the results, maybe Inoki got a win somewhere, but I never saw it. But that's kind of where they are right now. The pecking order, in my eyes, it's very close. Baba, obviously, of this 3-headed snake is above the other 2, but Oki's slightly ahead of Inoki, but Inoki's really made a lot of ground here in 1962. So it's definitely a fight to the top right now, but a very fun fight. And we're going to keep abreast of that situation as we move into the new year. And oh my God, we got a lot of stories coming in 1963, but the biggest of all has to be the situation involving Rikidozan.
Yeah, I don't know how far we want to go with it, but at the very end of 1963, it becomes the very end for Rikidozan as well, in more ways than one. If you want to follow the Japanese wrestling history, you're probably already aware of it, but there's a culmination of a bunch of events that result in what eventually happens after that December 7th, 1963 show where he faces the Destroyer. It's a lot to go through. I honestly don't know if we can cover it in 1 2-hour show, but we're gonna do our best. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, we'll see.
We have all the time in the world.
That's right. We'll see how far we get along because it may require its own episode. I don't really know all the information that we're going to be pouring out when we get there. Basically, the end of Rikidozan, literally. So
yeah.
we're gonna be covering that at length, and of course talking everything that goes on in 63 leading to that, the return of Baba, another World League around the corner. We're gonna see where Oki and Inoki wind up, and what Rikidozan does throughout 63 all the way to the end, his infamous match with the Destroyer shortly before his demise. And yeah, we got a lot to get into. Looking forward to it, Dan.
Me too. 1963 is a humongous year for Japanese wrestling and the JWA, and they are flush with cash again. For all the money they made in 1961, 1962, they made more of it. And they're on TV every week. There's money coming out of everywhere. I'm surprised Rikidozan's not building spaceships at this point.
He's got a bank vault like Scrooge McDuck.
Exactly. I like that cartoon.
Yeah, it's a good one.
So we have a lot to cover, and we're going to do as much as we can on the next episode. I can't guarantee that it will cover the totality of 1963, but we've got all the time in the world, and we want to do our due diligence in covering the history of Japanese professional wrestling properly. So stay tuned for the next episode. It is a landmark episode in the history of Japanese wrestling. Where there is a door that closes, other doors open, and the story just continues to branch out in different directions.
Yeah, it's going to be, I hate to call it a fun time because it could be a morbid time, but we're going to have fun covering everything that we can. And for those listening to this, by the time this drops, I want to wish everyone out there a happy Thanksgiving here in the States. If you're listening over in Japan, thank you for understanding our language here, the English language. We appreciate that. And just a happy week to you as well. And Dan, before we close up shop, I just want to remind everybody the Puro Wrestling Academy videocasts have begun. We already have 3 in the books, another one on the way, covering the likes of a very young Jumbo Sharuda, a very active and mobile Giant Baba, but of course the Funks, Dorian Terry Funk, Bruno Sammartino, Jack Briscoe is the world champion. Just the list goes on and on. We've had a blast so far, and your camera has arrived, so now everybody gets to watch Dan react to everything in real time as well. So looking forward to the next one of those. Just want to promote that again, the VIP Superfan tier, patreon.com/WrestleCopia.
Yeah, you guys have to check that out. You need to. It's important to do so. It allows you to experience Japanese professional wrestling in the classic stuff. These matches we're covering are over 50 years ago recorded, and it's in great quality. And you're hearing our commentary, not the Japanese commentary. We give background, we give play-by-play, color commentary. It's a really fun thing for us to do, and we're getting good feedback from those that are the Super VIP Patreons when they get to watch the show. Give it a shot. You won't be disappointed.
And those listening to the podcast that are VIP Superfan patrons, don't you guys worry. Episode 4 right around the corner, going to drop very shortly. And oh my gosh, on the show, the main event, the attraction of that specific show, going to feature NWA World Champion Jack Briscoe taking on Dory Funk Jr. 2 out of 3 falls in a very legendary classic near 60-minute matchup.
Yep, and this one is for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. So you're getting an NWA title match, and there isn't even a Japanese wrestler involved. But it's going to be on that show, and how can you go wrong with a very young Dory Funk and Jack Briscoe?
Dory Funk was young?
I know, it's hard to believe. I still have the old magazines from the late 60s, and you're like, who is this guy? He looks older than his dad almost.
Yeah.
It's crazy, but there's more to see with that show. We're still crawling through 1974 matches for All Japan. Classic stuff that is over 50 years old, and you're going to get to see so much of this classic wrestling with wrestlers in their primes and wrestlers just starting out. So you get to see these guys in the very beginnings of their careers knowing what they would later turn out to be. It's just a fun show, and it'd be a shame if you missed it. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, and with the holiday season coming upon us, guys, maybe we'll move away from the classic footage. It'll still be classic footage, but maybe we'll move away from 74, 75, and things of that nature. Maybe we'll do another fun episode just for the holiday season as well. Some up-to-date stuff. And when I say up-to-date, I mean maybe 80s, 90s, something along those lines. A few fun classic matches that everybody talks about. And I'm looking forward to doing another one with you, Dan. Can't wait to get more video casts on the way, guys. But right now we're going to close up here as far as the podcast goes. Dan, I'll let you send everyone home.
All right. Thanks for sticking around as long as you did. For all of you still listening, class is dismissed.